We all know the song. They put some poison into his wine. But what if the most famous dinner party in history never happened? Declassified documents and modern forensics suggest that Felix Yusupov wasn't the only one in the basement that night.
But it was a treacherous murder, and they did kill him. It was at a very bad time because there was nobody else to give advice to Nicholas II.
There is a theory that a third bullet, the one that actually ended Rasputin's life, didn't come from a Russian gun at all. It came from a British service revolver. This changes everything. It means the fall of the Russian Empire wasn't just domestic chaos. It was an international operation gone wrong. The cold hard truth about the Neva. It is December 30th, 1916. The Russian winter is brutal. The wind howls across the frozen Neva River in St. Petersburg. Police and investigators are out on the ice hacking away at a hole. They are looking for a missing man. But this isn't just any man. This is the man who seemingly controls the soul of the Empress. This is Grigory Rasputin. When they finally haul his heavy fur coat out of the freezing water, the legend is already being born. People are whispering that he is immortal. They say he cannot be stopped by mortal weapons. But here is the catch. The body on the autopsy table tells a completely different story. Cyanide has a distinct smell, like bitter almonds. It burns the lining of the stomach. It changes the color of the blood. The doctors open him up. They look. They sniff. Nothing. There is no irritation. There is no chemical smell. There is no poison. This is a massive problem for Felix's story. He swore that he watched Rasputin eat 2 entire cakes filled with the deadly powder. He said Rasputin drank poisoned wine and just sat there smiling, asking for more. Felix used this detail to prove that Rasputin was a demon. He said only a monster could survive that much poison. But the autopsy proves that Rasputin never swallowed any poison at all. So did the poison go bad? Did the doctor who provided it lie? Or did Felix invent the entire poisoned cake scene to add drama to his memoir? It gets worse. The prince claimed that after he shot Rasputin, the monk came back to life, attacked him, and then ran outside into the courtyard. He claimed they had to chase him down and fire more shots. He claimed they beat him with a rubber dumbbell. Finally, they tied him up and threw him into the river. Felix insisted that Rasputin was still alive when he hit the water. He claimed the monk tried to claw his way out from under the ice. This is the part of the story that gives everyone chills. The idea of a dying man drowning in the freezing dark, fighting to the last second. But let's look at the lungs. If a person drowns or acts while underwater, they inhale water. Their lungs fill with fluid. The autopsy report from 1916 is very clear. Rasputin's lungs were dry. He did not breathe in any river water. This means he was already gone before he hit the ice. He didn't struggle. He didn't claw at the surface. The supernatural endurance was a complete fabrication. Basically, the prince wanted the world to believe he fought a dragon, but the evidence shows he simply executed a man in a basement. The report lists 3 bullet wounds. The first one hit him in the chest, the second one hit him in the back, and the third one is the most suspicious of all. It was a shot to the center of the forehead. Point-blank range. This wasn't a chaotic struggle in the dark. This was a professional finishing move. So why lie? Why invent the poison? Why invent the resurrection? To understand that, you have to understand who Felix Yusupov really was. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a warrior. He was a pampered, ultra-rich aristocrat who loved theater and costumes. He viewed his own life as a stage play. And on this stage, he couldn't just be a murderer. That would be a sin. That would be a crime. He needed to be a holy warrior. If Rasputin is just a man, Felix is a criminal. But if Rasputin is a demon who eats poison and refuses to die, then Felix is a savior. The autopsy report was buried. In the chaos of the Russian Revolution, which started just months later, nobody cared about the forensic details. The Tsar was gone. The Bolsheviks were taking over. The old world was burning. In that fire, the truth about the body was lost. And because the truth was lost, Felix was free to tell his version. He waited until 1927, 11 years after the event. By then, most of the witnesses were dead or in exile. The evidence was gone. He was safe to write his masterpiece. He called it Rasputin, his malignant influence and his assassination. Notice the title. He puts the malignant influence first. He is setting the stage. He is telling you this man was evil, so whatever I did to him was justified. He describes the basement room in the Moika Palace. He describes the sound of the guitar playing upstairs to cover the noise. He sets the scene with Gothic perfection. He wants you to feel the fear he felt. He writes about his own trembling hands. He writes about the crucifix he held. He is painting a picture of good versus evil. But now we know the body contradicts the book. The monster was just a man who was shot 3 times. The battle was an execution, and the poison was a fantasy. This changes how we look at history. We usually think of the death of Rasputin as this wild, magical event that signaled the end of the Russian Empire. But the reality is much colder. It was a clumsy, desperate hit job by a group of rich men who thought that getting rid of one peasant would save their fortunes. They were wrong. And the craziest part is that the bullet that actually ended it might not have even come from a Russian gun. A professional hit, disguised as chaos. Let's zoom in on that third bullet wound, the one in the center of the forehead. In 1916, the standard Russian revolver was a Nagant. It was a sturdy, heavy weapon. Felix Yusupov had a pocket revolver. His co-conspirator, Grand Duke Dmitri, also had a standard military weapon. These guns fired a specific caliber of bullet. They made a specific type of hole. But forensic historians who have analyzed the photographs of the body have noticed something odd. The wound in the forehead looks different. It is cleaner. It has different burn marks around the edges, which suggests it was fired from extremely close range, but also by a different type of weapon. Ballistics experts suggest this bullet hole matches a Webley .455. That is a massive, heavy caliber bullet. And who carried a Webley .455 in 1916? British officers. This brings us to a man named Oswald Rayner. You probably haven't heard of him. He doesn't appear in the movies. He isn't in the cartoon version of the story. But he was Felix Yusupov's best friend from their university days at Oxford in England. Oswald Rayner wasn't just a school buddy, he was an agent for the British Secret Intelligence Service, what we now know as MI6. And get this, Rayner was in St. Petersburg on the night of the assassination. In fact, he visited Felix at the palace multiple times in the days leading up to the event. Why would the British care about a scruffy Siberian monk? It's not that simple, though. It's actually all about World War I. In 1916, the war was going badly. Millions were dying in the trenches. Russia was fighting Germany on the Eastern Front. The British were terrified, absolutely terrified that Russia was going to quit. Rasputin was famous for being anti-war. He told the Tsar that the war was destroying the Russian soul. He told the Empress that seeing her son, the heir, suffer was punishment for the war. The British believed that Rasputin was going to convince the Tsar to sign a separate peace treaty with Germany. If Russia stopped fighting, Germany could move all its troops to the west to fight Britain and France. Britain would likely lose the war. So for British intelligence, Rasputin wasn't just a weird monk. He was a strategic threat. He was a weapon of mass destruction aimed at the British Empire. So, here is the theory that many modern historians are starting to support. The plan wasn't just Felix's idea, the British helped orchestrate it. They wanted Rasputin gone to keep Russia in the war. The theory goes like this. The amateurs, Felix and the Grand Duke, botched the job. They shot Rasputin, but they didn't finish him instantly. There was chaos, panic. Rasputin was trying to escape, and then the professional stepped in. Oswald Rayner, standing in the shadows, walked up and delivered the final fatal shot to the forehead with his service revolver. This explains why the story is so messy. Felix had to invent a cover story to hide the fact that a British agent assassinated a Russian citizen on Russian soil. If that news got out, it would have caused a massive diplomatic crisis. It would have looked like Britain was interfering in the Tsar's court. So Felix invented the monster story. He made it sound like a supernatural struggle to distract everyone from the cold military precision of that final shot. He turned a political assassination into a ghost story. And it worked. For decades, nobody looked for the British spy. They were too busy looking for the poison that didn't exist. In his 1927 memoir, Felix mentions his friend Oswald Rayner. But he treats him like a side character. He says Rayner came by to check on him. He doesn't say Rayner was in the room. But interestingly, the English translation of Felix's book, the one that became a bestseller in the West, was dedicated to Oswald Rayner. Even more suspicious? Oswald Rayner helped Felix translate the book. Think about that. The alleged shooter helped the alleged mastermind write the story that cleared them both. They were controlling the narrative together. They were crafting the alibi in real time. This collaboration changes how we read the book. It's not a diary. It's a dossier. It's a constructed reality designed to protect the British government and the Russian prince. When you read the descriptions in the book, they are incredibly cinematic. The lighting, the dialogue, the suspense. It reads like an adventure novel. That is because it was written for an audience that wanted adventure. Felix was broke. He was living in exile. He needed money. A boring story about a political hit doesn't sell books. A story about battling a demon sells millions. But here's the craziest part. While Felix was selling this story to the public, he was also selling it to the courts. He realized that his specific version of events could make him even richer if he played his cards right. He turned his memoir into a legal weapon. Felix Yusupov versus the Silver Screen. By 1932, Felix Yusupov was living in Paris. The Russian Empire was gone. His palaces were museums run by the Soviets. His jewels were sold or stolen. The man who used to light cigarettes with large denomination banknotes was now struggling to maintain his lifestyle. Then Hollywood came calling, not to him directly, but to his story. The studio MGM released a massive blockbuster film called Rasputin and the Empress. It was a huge production. It starred the Barrymore family, the royalty of Hollywood. It told the story of the assassination. In the movie, the character based on Felix is called Prince Chegodiev, but everyone knew it was Felix. He wore the same clothes, he did the same things, but the movie added a spicy detail. It implied that Rasputin had seduced the prince's wife, Princess Irina. In the film, Rasputin hypnotizes her and takes advantage of her. Felix was furious. Not because they showed him ending Rasputin's life, he was proud of that. He was furious because they insulted his wife's honor, so the man who confessed to assassinating a holy man decided to sue MGM for libel. This was a landmark case. It was the trial of the century for the 1930s. Felix and Irina demanded huge damages. They argued that the movie defamed them. Here is the irony. Felix had admitted to being a murderer in his own book, but he was suing a movie studio for suggesting his wife had an affair. He was saying, "I am a killer, yes, but I am not a cuckold." The British courts agreed with him. They ruled that while Felix was indeed an assassin, the movie had lied about his wife. MGM had to pay out a massive sum, about £25,000. In today's money, that is well over $1 million. This lawsuit is actually the reason why every movie you watch today has that disclaimer in the credits. All characters appearing in this work are fictitious. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. That legal safety net exists because of Felix Yusupov. But this lawsuit revealed something deep about Felix's character. He was obsessed with control. He had lost his country. He had lost his status. The only thing he had left was his story. He guarded that story like a watchdog. He needed the world to accept his version of the truth. His version was, "I am a noble hero. Rasputin was a monster. My wife is pure." Anything that deviated from that script had to be destroyed. He spent years fighting newspapers, authors, and filmmakers. He became a prisoner of his own narrative. He couldn't just move on. He had to wake up every day and be the man who ended Rasputin. And this brings us to the big shift. Between 1927 and 1954, something changed in Felix. The money from the lawsuit ran out. The fame started to fade. The world went through a second world war. The Soviet Union wasn't going away, it was becoming a superpower. Felix grew old, and as he grew old, the swagger of the young prince started to crack. The certainty of the hero began to dissolve. When he sat down to write his memoirs again in 1954, titled Lost Splendor, the tone was different. In the first book, he sounded like an action star. "I shot him. I saved Russia." In the second book, he sounds like a ghost. He writes about the heavy burden of the past. He writes about the splendor of his youth being buried. He stops bragging about the details of the gore. Instead, he reflects on the tragedy of it all. Why the change? Because by 1954, Felix had to face a hard truth. His patriotic act didn't work. He claimed he removed Rasputin to save the Tsar and stabilize Russia. But what happened after the assassination? Did the country calm down? No. It exploded. Rasputin was ended in December 1916. The Tsar was forced to abdicate in March 1917, just 3 months later. The Bolsheviks took over in October. The entire Romanov family, the Tsar, the Empress, the children, were executed in a basement in Yekaterinburg a year later. Felix's action didn't save them. Many historians argue it actually accelerated their doom. By removing Rasputin, Felix removed the only person who could calm the Empress down. He showed the Russian people that the aristocracy was divided and violent. He proved that the system was rotting from the inside. Imagine living with that realization. Imagine sitting in a small apartment in Paris, looking at old photos and realizing that the heroic deed of your life might have been the spark that burned your whole world down. That is the subtext of the 1954 memoir. It is a book written by a man who is trying to justify his life, but deep down he knows he failed. And this is where the people watching this factor comes in. We love this story because we want mysteries to be magic. We want Rasputin to be a wizard. But the real mystery is the human psychology of Felix Yusupov. The 1954 book tries to soften the edges. He changes the description of Rasputin from a wild beast to a more complex figure. He admits to feeling fear, not just courage. He is trying to make peace with the ghost. But the ghost never left him. Friends said that even in his 80s, Felix would freeze if someone mentioned the name Rasputin. He would stare off into space. He once said, "The dead are never silent, especially when you made them so." That is a haunting line. It implies that despite the lawsuits, despite the books, despite the fame, Felix never really escaped that basement. The true cost of the night. Let's strip it all down. Let's rip away the velvet curtains, remove the Hollywood glamour, the British spies, and the self-serving memoirs. Let's turn off the movie set lights and look at what is actually there in the dark. What are we left with? We are left with a group of scared, entitled men in a damp basement. They are terrified of the future. They are losing a war. Their world is crumbling. They blame a peasant for their problems because it is easier than blaming themselves. It is easier than admitting they are the ones steering the ship into the iceberg. They invite him over. It's late. The cellar is soundproofed. They try to poison him, or maybe they chicken out and don't use the poison at all. They shoot him. He doesn't die instantly because human bodies are resilient. Adrenaline is a powerful drug. A desperate man fights harder than a rich boy with a soft life. He tries to run, they panic, they shoot him again. Then, to make sure someone, maybe Felix, maybe Rainer, walks up and puts a bullet in his head. It is ugly. It is brutal. It is not a battle of good versus evil. It is just murder. But we accepted Felix's version for so long because it felt better. It felt epic. We wanted to believe that the Russian Empire fell because of a dark wizard, not because of hunger, poverty, and incompetence. We wanted a villain we could understand. Felix gave us that villain. He gave us the monster Rasputin so we wouldn't look too closely at the monster Yusupov. But hold on. Before we close the case file, we have to look at the shadows in the corners of that room. Because there are theories, wild, fascinating theories, that suggest Felix wasn't even the main character in his own story. Let's talk about the bullet hole in the center of Rasputin's forehead. Forensic historians who have studied the photographs of the body noticed something strange. The other wounds? They were messy. But the headshot? That was professional. And more importantly, it was a different caliber. The Russians were carrying standard-issue weapons. But the hole in the head matches a .455 Webley revolver. Do you know who carried Webley revolvers? British officers. Enter Oswald Rainer. He was a British intelligence agent, a friend of Felix from their Oxford days, and he was in St. Petersburg that night. The theory goes like this. Britain was terrified that Rasputin was going to convince the Tsar to make peace with Germany. If Russia pulled out of World War I, Germany would throw all its troops at the Western Front, and Britain would be crushed. So, Did London order the hit? Imagine the scene. The Russians are panicking. Rasputin is crawling across the snow, refusing to die. Felix is hyperventilating, and then, cool as ice, the British agent steps out of the shadows, walks up, and finishes the job with one clean shot. In this version, Felix isn't a hero, he's a patsy. He's just the cover story for a military assassination operation orchestrated by the British Secret Intelligence Service. And if international espionage isn't wild enough for you, let's get personal. Let's get uncomfortably personal. There is a theory that this wasn't about saving the empire at all. It was about obsession. Felix Yusupov was a complex man. He was known for cross-dressing, for his flamboyant lifestyle, and his fluid intimate. He had a fascination with Rasputin that bordered on the magnetic. Rasputin called Felix the Little One. He tried to cure Felix of his eccentricities. Some historians suggest that Felix's motive wasn't political outrage, but a strange, twisted mix of attraction and repulsion. Was it a crime of passion? Did Rasputin reject him? Or did Rasputin try to manipulate him in a way that snapped Felix's fragile ego? When you read the memoirs, look at how Felix describes Rasputin's eyes. Look at the intensity. That isn't just hatred, that is obsession. Killing Rasputin might have been the only way Felix knew how to break the spell. And get this, modern toxicology reports suggest something else entirely about the poison that didn't work. This is where the supernatural defense falls apart. Felix claimed Rasputin ate enough cyanide to kill an elephant and kept smiling. He used this to prove Rasputin was a demon. But science has a different explanation. First, we have the sugar theory. The cyanide was placed in sweet cakes. Petit 4. Cyanide needs stomach acid to activate and become lethal. But sugar consists of glucose and aldehydes. Chemical compounds in the sugar can actually bind with the cyanide and neutralize it, turning it into a harmless compound called cyanohydrin. If that is true, Rasputin wasn't immune to poison because of dark magic. He was immune because he was eating sugary cakes. Felix, watching him eat, thought he was seeing a miracle. But really, he was just seeing a man enjoying a dessert that had accidentally neutralized the weapon. Or consider the gastritis theory. Rasputin was a heavy drinker. Years of cheap alcohol might have destroyed the lining of his stomach, causing chronic gastritis. This means he produced very little stomach acid. Without the acid, the cyanide couldn't break down effectively. He might have just gotten a mild tummy ache while his assassin sat there sweating bullets. And then there is the final gruesome debate. How did he actually die? Felix wants you to believe the man was unkillable. He wants you to believe they dumped him in the river and he still tried to claw his way out from under the ice. For decades, the story was that water was found in Rasputin's lungs. This implies he was still breathing when he hit the water. It suggests that after being poisoned, shot 3 times, and beaten, he was still alive in the freezing Neva River. It adds to the legend of the Rasputin monster. But modern analysis of the original autopsy report, the one that wasn't doctored for the papers, tells a different story. No water in the lungs. He was dead before he hit the water. The claw marks on the ice, probably caused by the movement of the ice blocks themselves or the clumsy way the body was dumped. The hand raised in a blessing? Rigor mortis. Just a stiffening of the muscles as the body froze. There was no final struggle in the water, there was no supernatural resistance. Just a dead body being shoved into a hole in the ice by panicked men who wanted to go home. It's almost funny, in a dark way. The prince is sitting there in his palace, sweating, praying, waiting for the devil to die. And the devil is just a guy wondering why his host is acting so weird, maybe complaining about heartburn. This lack of communication, this paranoia sums up the entire era. The aristocracy couldn't talk to the peasants. The Tsar couldn't talk to his people, and Felix couldn't see Rasputin as a human being. In the end, the memoirs of Felix Yusupov are not a historical record of how Rasputin died. They are a psychological record of how Felix Yusupov lived with himself afterwards. They are the desperate writings of a man trying to build a statue of himself out of words, hoping it will block out the view of the ruins he helped create. Think about it. Felix lived for decades after this. He lived in Paris. He needed money. He realized that "I murdered an unarmed peasant in a basement" doesn't sell books. but I fought a demon who refused to die? That sells. That gets you interviews, that gets you a movie deal, and it did. Felix Yusupov actually sued MGM in the 1930s over a movie depicting the events. And he won. He profited from the lie. He turned his crime into a franchise. The discrepancies between his 1927 book and his 1954 book show us the erosion of a man's soul. The details change. The dialogue gets more dramatic. The demon gets stronger. The first book is the lie he told the world. The second book is the lie he told himself so he could sleep at night. And the body? It never lied. It told us from day one, I was a man. You killed me, and nothing you write will change that. We are still fascinated by Rasputin today. We see him in comic books, in movies, and songs. We see him as the sorcerer. But the real story isn't about magic. It's about the danger of believing your own hype. Felix believed he was the hero of the story. He believed that if he just removed this one bad piece from the chessboard, the whole game would be saved. He believed he could alter the course of history with a gun. He didn't understand that the rot was already in the foundation. Killing the symptom didn't cure the disease. In fact, killing Rasputin didn't save the monarchy. It accelerated the fall. It showed the people that the aristocracy was lawless, brutal, and fractured. So, was Felix Yusupov a patriot or just a wealthy murderer with a good publicist? And if the British intelligence theory is true, does that mean the history of the 20th century was shaped by a single secret bullet? It makes you wonder what other legends are just cover-ups. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button and subscribe for more historical mysteries exposed.